Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling. And man, I really appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to check today's episode out. Always happy to have you guys around here. Today, guys, we're going to make the case why this no information rule that we're seeing all these rash of disqualifications within Bassmaster and MLF, it needs to go. That rule needs to be taken out of fishing. I'm going to explain to you guys why in this particular video. And then also we're going to get into some of the rules that need to be implemented and enforced if you really want to make a fair playing field above and beyond this whole no information rule. So we're going to get into that in today's episode. Also, guys, before we get started, I just wanted to extend a big thank you out there. Big thank you to everybody out there that's taken time to support Intuitive Angling, guys, by subscribing to the channel and using all the channel links that I put in there. If you guys are one of those people that use my links and subscribe to the channel, big thank you from me and my family. We definitely do not take that for granted, and just want to let you guys know how much we appreciate that. Okay, guys, I wanted to do this video. I saw a video this morning on Get Your Fish On. Steve Chapman did a video where another Elite Series angler was disqualified for receiving information, failing a polygraph test. A guy named Logan Latuso down at Lake 10 Killer in the Bassmaster Elite Series tournament down there. And it made me think, and I want to do this video after I saw that, about how this no information rule needs to be dropped from the tournaments, and it needs to be replaced with some other rules. And let me explain to you what the deal is. We have seen over the past 2 years, or I've seen more people disqualified from this, violating this no information rule, than ever before. And it's a bunch of crap. Let me explain to you why it's a bunch of crap. We've talked about this a little bit before, but let me reiterate this before I get into actually what needs to be happen. You cannot enforce a no information rule. Tournaments can't do it. They've tried forever. This whole information rule thing, it's been going on since the 70s. This is nothing new. It is unenforceable, because here's what happens, why you can't do it. You're at a tournament. I don't care if you're at a BFL tournament, Bassmaster Elite, whatever. This has happened to me hundreds of times in my career. So I could have been disqualified hundreds of times over my career, along with other pros the same way. You're at a gas station, you're gassing up, get ready for the next day of the tournament, sitting there minding your own business. Some guy comes up to you, local, starts talking fishing, starts talking to you, and then inevitably he goes, "Hey man, I tell you where you can catch them. Go right over to that point over there and throw a plumb plastic worm in 20 foot of water, and you'll get your limit right there." And then you can say, "Well, I'm sorry, we can't get any information. I appreciate it," but it's too late. He's giving you information. So when you get a polygraph test, and inevitably when they ask this question, it's like, "Did you receive any information prior to the tournament cutoff?" You did. You received information. And then when you get hooked up to all these wires and probes, your anxiety's high, and you fail the polygraph test because you literally did nothing wrong, but the innate nature of a polygraph test does not care if you've done nothing wrong. You still received information, and that's one aspect of it. And then there's gradients to it. There's that unintentional accessing information that you were completely innocent from, but you can still get disqualified for. And then there's actually malicious behavior where you're trying to violate a rule. You know the rule, it's clear, and you went ahead and did it anyway. And then there's everything in between. There's some situations, guys, you're out on the lake, you're fishing by a boat dock. Some grandma or grandpa says, "Hey man, I just saw a 5-pounder right underneath my walkway here." Do you go over there and make a cast into that walkway and take that information, or do you keep going down the bank? Or I've seen other situations where somebody will be trying to give a pro information, and the pro just doesn't say anything. They let them talk, and they don't tell them that we can't get information. So they're getting this information without soliciting the information. So this is what I'm talking about. This is an unenforceable rule. It's a terrible rule. And more often than not, I can tell you from somebody I don't solicit information. The only information I've solicited is if I know somebody that lives on a lake, or I've got a friend that lives on a lake I'm going to, and it's not in the off limits. I have called them up and say, "Hey man, what's the water level? What's the water clarity? What's been the predominant patterns?" Very generic information, because most of the time, if somebody tries to feed you information, it's going to backfire, because it's something that's already over with. Somebody says, "Okay, I caught a limit of bass last week over on this row of docks over here. That was last week. Most of the time, those fish are gone. So accessing information hurts anglers more than it helps them most of the time. Now, yeah, there are some situations where it's helped anglers. I'm not going to deny that. But more than not, it winds up hurting anglers out there, and it penalizes people by getting disqualified at these tournaments that really legitimately should not be penalized for it, simply because of the nature of how that information came to them. I think everybody can see that. Okay, so since that is an unenforceable rule, you have to focus on the rules that you can enforce. And the rules, the number one rule that you can enforce, that if you want to level the playing field, and that's what we're talking about here, when you're talking about not allowing anglers to access the playing field, you're trying to create the most level playing field that you possibly can, where one person doesn't have an advantage over the other. If you want to control that, you have got to put stricter limits on equipment limitations. That's where it needs to lay within, because right now, you can have one dude, if he wants to put $100,000 worth of spotlighting equipment on his boat, he can do it. And then you got some other guy over here that's scraping every penny he has together, and maybe he can just afford a little 7-inch 2-dimensional sonar screen, while this other dude's got $50,000 or $100,000 worth of electronics on his boat. The same dude that has $50,000 or $100,000 worth of electronics on his boat may have 35 rod and reel combos in his rod locker, where this other guy can afford 5 or 6. Here's one thing you control. You put equipment limitations. You allow tournament anglers to have one electronic unit on their console, a 2-dimensional sonar unit, and maybe a GPS, 1 unit, combo unit, 1 on the console, 1 up front. That's it. That is the baseline. You can't have anything more than that. You can get into that whole thing. You could probably spend $700 or $800 and have that 1 unit for that. Then you do the same thing with rod and reels. You allow 8 rod and reel combos. That levels the playing field. You go over the next step. You're not allowed to have a boat with over 150 horsepower motor. You cannot have a boat over 20 foot long. Therefore, you reduce the cost of what it costs to compete tournament-wise, and you level the playing field in a realistic manner that actually has something to do with the outcomes of the tournaments. And then there's other rules that you can do the same thing with it too. But ultimately, you can only enforce those rules that can be enforced. And we have seen careers destroyed and careers decimated over the past 2 years by these no information rules, these random polygraph tests that are taking these guys out a lot of times unintentionally. I know several of them guys did not solicit information, but they fell into that category, what I'm talking about, of being exposed to information that they did not solicit, and they're disqualified for that. That's not what that rule is meant to be. That rule was put in place to where somebody did not maliciously, intentionally, after the information cutoff day, go to somebody and say, tell me where to fish. Tell me where I can catch a fish at. And then they say, you go right here and you'll catch a fish right here. That is what that rule is meant to stop. But in the meantime, there's too much collateral damage leading up to that. And like I said, more than not, information does not help you. It winds up hurting you more than it helps you. So this is something that really needs to be looked at a lot. These tournament organizations need a complete restructuring in their rule systems. In my opinion, half of the rules need to be taken out of the tournaments, and there needs to be another half added to them that are really enforceable and will make a difference there. So anyway, guys, let me know what y'all think about it. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll talk later.